The numbers told a story of roaring success, a symphony of escalating profits and market dominance printed in the stark, unforgiving black ink of a quarterly report. The faces of the people who composed that symphony for him, however, told a different story, a silent, dissonant dirge of exhaustion and quiet desperation. Julian Blackwood sat nestled in the deep shadows of a corner booth, a ghost in his own gilded machine. This was the Gilded Steer, the crown jewel of his Chicago operations, the flagship steakhouse in the sprawling Blackwood hospitality empire. To the financial world, he was a legend, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear, the invisible force behind a global brand. But here, tonight, to the dismissive maitre d' who had reluctantly seated him, he was nothing more than an anomaly. A man in his late 50s, dressed in a faded denim jacket that had seen better decades, a soft gray Henley, and work boots that bore the honest scars of actual work. He was a piece of grit in the otherwise flawless oyster of opulence, a stray who had somehow wandered into a cathedral, built to worship prime cuts of beef and vintages that cost more than a monthly rent. This was his ritual, his personal pilgrimage into the heart of his own creation. To show up unannounced, unadorned, stripped of the armor of his name, and to witness the raw, unvarnished truth. A truth that the glossy, curated reports from his executive team could never, or would never, reveal. The air itself felt stratified. At table level, it was a rich tapestry of aromas, the Maillard reaction of searing fat on hot iron, the sweet, earthy scent of aged wood and leather, the subtle perfume of money worn as a second skin. But above it, in the hushed movements of the staff, the atmosphere was thin, tight, and brittle, with a tension he could almost taste. Their smiles were marvels of engineering, constructed with architectural precision to withstand the scrutiny of demanding patrons, but they were hollow structures, devoid of warmth or life. He saw it in a dozen microaggressions. A young busboy, no older than 19, let a heavy steak knife slip from a tray. The silver clattered against the marble floor, a sound amplified to the level of a gunshot in a momentary lull in the dining room's hum. From the opulent shadows near the host stand, a figure detached itself and glided across the floor. Martin Wexler, the restaurant manager, according to the small, ostentatious, golden nameplate on his lapel. His suit was a size too small, strangling a frame that was beginning to soften, and his dark hair was shellacked into an unnatural helmet. Wexler didn't raise his voice. His power was more insidious than that. He leaned in close to the terrified busboy, a predator, whispering to its cornered prey. Julian couldn't hear the words, but he saw their effect. The color drained from the young man's face, leaving it as white and stark as a fresh napkin. A subtle, convulsive swallow. A flicker of shame and fear in his eyes. Wexler straightened up, his face resetting into a reptilian smile of supreme satisfaction. He surveyed his domain, a petty tyrant on his gilded throne, and his eyes, like a moth to a flame, lingered for a fraction of a second too long on the brass and wood cash register. This was it. The rot. Julian had seen it before. It wasn't the spectacular, headline-grabbing implosion of a faulty gas line or a health code violation. It was the quiet, creeping gangrene of the soul that hollows out an empire from the inside out, leaving behind a beautiful, fragile shell that would shatter at the slightest touch. Martin Wexler was a carrier of this disease. He thrived on the small terrors, the daily humiliations that ground good people into dust. And then, through the carefully orchestrated chaos, he saw her. She moved between the tables with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the bone-deep weariness etched in the fine lines around her eyes. Her name, he would later learn from a hushed call from another waiter, was Sarah. Her black uniform was immaculate, pressed to a razor's edge, but he noticed the fabric over her elbows, and at the cuff of her right sleeve was worn thin. The black faded to a soft gray. It was the telltale sign of years spent in the trenches of service, countless hours of leaning over tables, serving, clearing, resetting. She was a veteran of 1,000 tiny wars fought over appetizer spoons and steak temperatures. She approached his table, her notepad held at a ready, professional angle. "Good evening, sir. My name is Sarah. Can I start you off with something to drink tonight?" Her voice was a low, smooth melody, a practiced calm layered over a profound exhaustion he was becoming attuned to. "Just water for now." "Thank you, Sarah," Julian said, keeping his eyes slightly downcast, playing the part of a man more accustomed to a diner counter than a white tablecloth. "Of course." He watched her as she retreated toward the service station. Around her neck, resting in the hollow of her throat, was a small silver locket. It was unadorned and old, the silver tarnished not from neglect, but from the constant, unconscious touch of a thumb. He recognized the gesture immediately. It was a talisman, a grounding object, a silent source of comfort in a hostile world. It was the only piece of her that wasn't company issued, a tiny island of personal history in a vast sea of corporate branding. Julian had a rule on these visits: look for the details the company handbooks tried to erase. That locket was a novel. When she returned with his water, a heavy crystal glass sweating onto a crisp coaster, he ordered, "I'll have the 24-ounce porterhouse, medium rare, and a side of the grilled asparagus, please." It was a simple, classic order, the restaurant's signature dish, a test. She jotted it down in a neat, efficient script, using a simple ballpoint pen that looked like it was on its last legs. The plastic casing cracked near the metal tip. A small, insignificant detail that spoke volumes. It meant the management was too cheap to provide proper supplies, or she was too proud, or too broke, to buy a new one. She didn't try to upsell him on the lobster tail add-on, the truffle butter, or the recommended wine pairing that would have tripled the cost of his meal. She simply looked up, met his eyes for a brief, startling second, and in that fleeting connection, he saw a flicker of genuine acknowledgement. It wasn't pity or disdain. It was simple, professional respect. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Excellent choice, sir," she said. In that moment, Julian felt something he hadn't experienced all night, a sliver of genuine hospitality. It was a stark contrast to the performative deference of the other staff members, who moved with the terrified precision of bomb disposal experts. For the next hour, Julian became a fixture in the booth, nursing his water, a silent observer of the grim theater unfolding before him. The restaurant was a perfectly produced play, but the backstage drama was leaking onto the main stage. He watched Wexler berate a young hostess, his voice a venomous hiss, for seating a party of 6 2 minutes behind their reservation time, a cardinal sin in his book of petty tyrannies. He saw him corner a bartender and run a gloved finger across the gleaming granite counter, inspecting it for dust with a theatrical scowl. A power play for the benefit of the other staff. The man wasn't a manager. He was a warden. And this wasn't a restaurant. It was a minimum security prison with better food. His attention kept returning to Sarah. She was a master of her craft, navigating the treacherous waters of the dinner rush with an almost supernatural calm. He watched her handle a particularly difficult customer, a florid, red-faced man in a ridiculously expensive suit who was reeking of vintage scotch and entitlement. He was complaining loudly, his voice slicing through the ambient chatter, that his steak was cooked medium, not the medium well he had insisted upon. It was a classic, transparent ploy for a discount, an act of belligerence designed to bully a free meal out of the establishment. Sarah handled it with impossible patience, her face a serene mask of professional concern. "I am so terribly sorry about that, sir. It is completely unacceptable. Please, allow me to have our chef prepare a brand new one for you immediately. It will be my top priority." Like a shark smelling blood in the water, Wexler materialized at the table's edge. His presence seemed to suck the very air from the vicinity. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his smile a rictus of false charm aimed at the customer, but his eyes shooting daggers of pure venom at Sarah. "No problem at all, Martin," Sarah said, her voice impossibly steady. "I'm just ensuring this gentleman has the perfect dining experience he deserves at the Gilded Steer." The subtle emphasis on the restaurant's name was a masterful touch, a gentle reminder of the standards they were all supposed to uphold. Wexler's eyes narrowed into slits. He handled the situation by fawning over the irate customer, his voice dripping with sycophantic apology. He comped the man's entire meal, threw in a bottle of premium Cabernet Sauvignon, and treated him like a visiting king. It was a grand, public gesture of appeasement. But as he turned away, just before he was out of earshot, he leaned towards Sarah and muttered something low and vicious. Julian, a man who had spent 3 decades mastering the art of reading lips across hostile boardroom tables, caught every syllable with perfect, chilling clarity. "That's the 3rd time this week, you incompetent bitch. This is coming out of your tips." The injustice was so raw, so petty, so fundamentally cruel, that a knot of cold, hard anger coiled in Julian's stomach. This wasn't just a bad manager anymore. This was a thief. A parasite stealing not just money, but the dignity and livelihood of his employees. He watched Sarah retreat to a darkened service station, her back to the prying eyes of the dining room. Her shoulders slumped for a single, heartbreaking moment. She didn't cry. She placed both hands flat on the stainless steel counter, her head bowed. He saw her thumb go to the silver locket at her throat, rubbing it back and forth, back and forth. A silent prayer. A moment of grounding in a world that was trying to sweep her away. Then she took a deep, shuddering breath. Her shoulders straightened. She pasted on her professional smile, and she turned back to face the floor. A soldier heading back into the fray. That was the moment Julian knew, with absolute certainty. The hushed complaints that had been bubbling up to corporate HR, the whispers of a toxic work environment at the Chicago flagship. It was all real, and probably worse than he had imagined. And this woman, this quiet, resilient waitress with the tarnished locket, was standing at the epicenter of the storm. His steak arrived. It was Sarah who brought it, a silent offering. It was a magnificent piece of meat, a perfect char on the outside, the aroma of garlic, thyme, and sizzling butter rising from the heated plate. She placed it before him with a hand that was impossibly steady. "Enjoy your meal, sir," she said, her voice the same low, professional calm. But her eyes, for a fleeting second, held a different story, a story of desperate calculation. As she turned to leave, her hand, the one holding the small tray, brushed against his, which was resting on the table. It was a feather-light touch, a ghost of a sensation. But in that brief contact, he felt the sharp, folded corner of a napkin being pressed firmly into his palm. It was so quick, so impossibly discreet. It was a piece of masterful sleight of hand. He didn't react. He didn't flinch. He kept his face an impassive mask, his eyes fixed on the perfectly cooked steak. He heard her footsteps retreat, fading back into the din of the restaurant. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath the surface of his calm exterior. This was it, the catalyst, the flare sent up from the heart of the besieged fortress. He waited a full minute, a period of time that stretched into an eternity. He picked up his knife and fork. He sliced a perfect, ruby-red piece of the filet mignon off the bone. He brought it to his mouth, chewed slowly, deliberately. The steak was divine, a testament to the immense skill of a chef who was, in all likelihood, also suffering under Wexler's tyrannical reign. Then, keeping his hands below the level of the table, shielded by the white linen cloth, he carefully unfolded the napkin. The writing was shaky, etched onto the flimsy paper with that dying pen he had noticed earlier. It wasn't a rambling plea for help. It wasn't a litany of complaints. It was a piece of raw, dangerous intelligence. It was a key. He's poisoning this place. Check the voided cash receipts after 10 p.m. Freezer number 3, behind the mislabeled veal boxes. The cameras in the back service hall don't record. Watch your back. A chill, colder than the Chicago wind whipping off Lake Michigan, snaked its way down Julian's spine. This was infinitely worse than he could have ever imagined. Poisoning wasn't just a metaphor for the toxic work environment. Freezer number 3, mislabeled veal boxes. This wasn't just about skimming tips or verbal abuse. This was about systematic, dangerous, and criminal fraud. The note was an act of profound courage. She hadn't slipped it to just any customer. She had observed him. She had seen something in him, perhaps the way he watched everything, perhaps the absence of arrogance, and she had taken a monumental, career-ending, life-altering risk, a risk that could cost her the very job she so clearly, desperately needed. He carefully folded the napkin and slipped it deep into the inner pocket of his denim jacket, where it felt as heavy as a block of lead. The exquisite flavor of the porterhouse turned to ash in his mouth. The game had changed. He was no longer a passive, ghost observer. He was now an active player. And Julian Blackwood never, ever played to lose. He forced himself to eat half the steak, to maintain the illusion, to move at a natural, unhurried pace. Every instinct screamed at him to stand up, to find Wexler, to detonate this entire situation right now with a few brutal, well-chosen words that would shatter the man's world. But that would be a fool's move, a satisfying but ultimately empty gesture. It would get Wexler fired, certainly, but it wouldn't solve the systemic problem that allowed a man like him to fester. It wouldn't honor the sheer, terrifying courage of the woman who had passed him that note. Rot like this had deep, tangled roots. You didn't just prune the dying branches. You had to rip the whole damned thing out of the ground, roots and all, salt the earth, and start again. He signaled for the check. To his disappointment, a different waitress brought it, a young, nervous girl who avoided his eyes. He had hoped to see Sarah one last time, to give her some silent, infinitesimal signal of reassurance. He paid with a crisp $100 bill from a thin money clip, leaving a $20 tip. It was enough to be seen as generous for a man dressed like him, but not enough to be memorable or draw suspicion. As he walked toward the grand, heavy oak doors of the exit, he deliberately chose a path that took him past the service station where he had seen Sarah take refuge earlier. She was there, her back to him, her hands moving in a swift, automatic rhythm as she polished silverware, restoring order one fork at a time. He slowed his pace just slightly as he drew level with her. "The steak was excellent," he said, his voice just loud enough for her to hear over the clatter of the kitchen. "Please, give my compliments to the chef." She flinched, as if struck, her body going rigid. She turned slowly, her face a pale mask of confusion and raw, naked fear. Her eyes were wide, searching his for any sign of betrayal. He looked directly at her, holding her terrified gaze for a beat longer than was socially acceptable. He didn't smile. He didn't wink. He didn't offer any cheap, theatrical gesture. He simply gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. A gesture that said, "Message received. I understand. Help is on the way." Then he turned and walked out into the biting cold of the Chicago night, the warm, opulent light of the gilded steer disappearing as the heavy door swung shut behind him. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, the carefully constructed persona of the down-on-his-luck diner evaporated like mist. The slight slump in Julian's shoulders vanished, replaced by the rigid posture of a man accustomed to command. He pulled out a sleek, custom-built smartphone with military-grade encryption and dialed a number from his favorites list. It was answered before the first ring had even finished. "Cynthia," he said, his voice stripped of all its earlier humility. It was now cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of ice, the voice that had built a global empire. "I'm at the Chicago flagship. We have a fire, a Category 5. Boots on the ground in 20 minutes, was the immediate reply. Cynthia Wu, his head of global security and corporate intelligence, was a woman who personified terrifying efficiency. A former top cybersecurity prosecutor for the Department of Justice, she viewed corporate malfeasance not as a business problem, but as a personal, moral insult. "Negative," Julian commanded, stepping into the back of a black, nondescript Audi A8 that had pulled silently to the curb the moment he appeared. The driver, a man built like a bank vault, nodded at him in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. "Stay where you are. This needs to be surgical. I need scalpels, not a sledgehammer. Not yet." He sat back against the cool leather and relayed the contents of the note, word for word, his voice a low, intense monotone. On the other end of the secure line, he could hear the frantic, rhythmic tapping of keys, the sound of Cynthia Wu going to war. "Voided cash receipts after 10 p.m., Cynthia repeated, her voice a clipped, analytical staccato. It's the oldest trick in the book, a classic cash skimming scheme. He waits for the late-night rush when customers are drinking, less attentive. He takes their cash, voids the transaction in the point-of-sale system, and pockets the money before the final reconciliation. The late hour is key, corporate oversight is minimal, and the system auto-reconciles overnight. "It gets much worse," Julian said, his voice grim as he stared out at the blurred city lights. Freezer number 3, hidden behind mislabeled veal boxes, and the warning that he's poisoning the place. "That feels literal to me, Cynthia. This isn't just skimming. This is food safety fraud, black market sales. I want to know what the hell is in that freezer." "I can't get a physical asset inside tonight without tipping our hand," she mused, the sound of her typing never ceasing. "But I can get into their inventory management system. Every single cut of meat that comes into that restaurant is barcoded, weighed, and tracked from supplier to plate. If he's hiding something, there will be a ghost in the inventory data, a discrepancy between what was ordered, what was sold, and what was marked as waste. And the cameras? The note said the back hall ones don't record." A sound that might have been a humorless laugh crackled over the line. "He's a low-level, amateur crook, Julian. He probably disabled the local DVR loop and thinks he's invisible. He's an idiot. Every camera from every Blackwood property streams a live, encrypted feed to a central cloud server farm in Utah in real time. It's been company policy for a decade. I'm looking at the back service hallway right now. Let me just rewind the tape a few hours." For the next 10 minutes, Julian sat in the silent, temperature-controlled comfort of his car as it navigated the arteries of the city, a sterile bubble worlds away from the tense, human drama unfolding back at the steakhouse. He listened as Cynthia narrated, in cold, hard detail, the quiet crimes of Martin Wexler. "Okay, got it," she said, her voice suddenly sharp with the thrill of discovery. "Here's the pattern. Every Tuesday and Saturday night, just before closing, a white, unmarked refrigerated truck pulls into the loading bay. No logos. The company is Gourmet Provisions, Inc. I've already run it. It's a ghost. A shell corporation registered to a P.O. box in Gary, Indiana. Our guy, Wexler, brings out sealed company-stamped boxes of our product. The driver of the truck brings in different plain brown boxes. It's a clean swap. No money exchanged on camera. It's slick. So he's not just skimming cash," Julian murmured, the ugly picture beginning to form in his mind. "He's stealing my inventory. A5 Wagyu, prime rib roasts, lobster tails, God knows what else. He's selling it on the black market through this ghost company. And replacing it with what?" Cynthia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "That's what's in freezer number 3, Julian. That's what's in those plain brown boxes. Cheaper, possibly expired, non-graded, or illegally sourced meat being passed off to your customers as our premium stock. He's not just stealing from you. He's committing mass-scale consumer fraud and creating a massive public health risk. He is, quite literally, poisoning your brand. A wave of pure, cold fury, so intense it was almost nauseating, washed over Julian. The gilded steer and the entire Blackwood empire was built on a single, inviolable promise: uncompromising quality. It was the promise his family name carried. Wexler wasn't just a thief. He was a heretic, committing sacrilege in the very temple Julian had built. And Sarah Jenkins, with her quiet dignity and worn-out locket, was a guardian of that temple, risking everything to alert the king to the treason in his court. "I want a full financial and personal workup on Wexler," Julian ordered, his voice now dangerously low. "Bank accounts, credit cards, mortgages, any shell corporations. I want to know where every single stolen dollar has gone. And I want a deep dive on this gourmet provisions. I want the name of the driver, the owner, their criminal records, their favorite brand of chewing gum. Tear them apart, Cynthia. Leave nothing but scorched earth." "Already on it," she confirmed. "But Julian," the note mentioned the voided receipts. "That's a cash business. To do it at the scale I'm starting to see in the data, it's not a one-man job. He'd need at least one accomplice on the inside, someone handling the registers. A bartender, a hostess, or another manager." She was right. The rot was deeper than just one man. Pull the employee files for the last 6 months. Cross-reference their work schedules with the timestamps on every single voided cash receipt. Find the accomplice. He ended the call. The car was now pulling smoothly onto a private access road leading to a small, discreet airfield on the outskirts of the city. His Gulfstream G700 was waiting, fueled and ready to take him back to his life in New York. But he wasn't leaving. Not yet. "Tell the pilot to stand down," he instructed his driver. "We're staying in Chicago. Get me the penthouse suite at the Peninsula. Book it under the name Charles Smith. And get me a secure satellite internet link installed within the hour." He was going to see this through. On the ground. From the front lines. For the next 36 hours, the palatial penthouse suite, with its panoramic views of the glittering Chicago skyline, was transformed into a state-of-the-art corporate war room. Julian Blackwood, dressed in simple gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, operated from the center of this web, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering rage. Encrypted laptops hummed on the marble dining table, and large, secure monitors displayed a spiderweb of flowing data: Wexler's financial records, personnel files from the restaurant, blueprints of the building, and a mosaic of live and recorded security feeds from the Gilded Steer. Cynthia's team of digital ghosts worked with salient, ruthless efficiency. They were corporate scalpels, dissecting Wexler's life piece by piece, without leaving so much as a digital fingerprint. The picture that emerged was even uglier and more pathetic than Julian had imagined. Martin Wexler wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a desperate man drowning in debt, gambling markers from 3 different casinos in Vegas, a disastrous crypto investment that had wiped out his savings, a mortgage on a McMansion he couldn't afford, and credit card bills that looked like phone numbers. He wasn't just skimming to get rich. He was stealing frantically just to stay afloat. The ghost company, Gourmet Provisions, Inc., was quickly traced back to Wexler's brother-in-law, a man with a string of failed businesses and 2 prior convictions for health code violations at a butchery he once owned. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. They were swapping out thousands of dollars worth of USDA Prime and A5 Wagyu beef for cheap, ungraded, and often illegally butchered meat sourced from a disreputable supplier in rural Wisconsin, a supplier who is currently under investigation by the Department of Agriculture. This was a massive, dangerous fraud that put every single diner at risk of foodborne illness. And as Cynthia had predicted, they found the accomplice. A junior manager named Derek Malley, a young, ambitious man Wexler had taken under his wing. The data was undeniable. On nights, Derek worked the late shift and handled the final cash-outs. The voided cash receipts spiked by an average of $3,000 to $4,000. On nights, he was off. The number dropped to nearly zero. It was a simple, dirty, and brutally effective partnership. Wexler provided the intimidation and the supply chain fraud. Derek handled the digital sleight of hand. But it was the human cost, the data trail of quiet suffering, that truly hardened Julian's resolve. Cynthia's team managed to access the restaurant's local server, specifically the employee complaint database. Wexler had been diligently wiping it clean on the first of every month, but he was unaware of the ghost images that were automatically backed up to the Utah server farm. It was a digital graveyard of ignored pleas. There were dozens of entries from the past year. Complaints of verbal abuse, illegal deductions from tips, and several deeply disturbing allegations of harassment and unwanted advances, all from young, vulnerable, and easily intimidated staff members. And every single complaint was marked as resolved by Martin Wexler himself, with no follow-up, no investigation, no action taken. Then he saw her name, Sarah Jenkins. Her official employee file was thin. She'd been with the company for 5 years. Perfect attendance record. 0 official complaints ever filed against her. Not a single demerit. But Cynthia, digging deeper, found something else. 3 separate emails sent directly from Sarah's personal email address to the generic corporate HR intake address over the past year. They were not emotional. They were cautiously worded, meticulously professional, and damningly detailed. They outlined Wexler's illegal practice of forcing servers to cover the bills of customers who dined and dashed or complained dishonestly to get a free meal. She had documented everything: dates, times, check numbers, and the exact amounts deducted from her pay. Each of her carefully crafted emails had received the same sterile, automated response. "Thank you for your feedback. A representative from Human Resources will be in touch with you shortly." No one ever was. The system he had built, the very safety net he had insisted upon to protect his people, had failed her. It had funneled her legitimate, courageous complaints into a digital black hole. She had tried to do it the right way, the official way, the by-the-book way. And when the system had completely and utterly ignored her, she had been forced to take matters into her own hands, armed with a cracked pen, a folded napkin, and a desperate hope that a stranger might listen. Cynthia's voice crackled over the secure video link. Her face was grim. "We have more than enough, Julian. Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, reckless endangerment. This is a multi-agency case. We can hand this entire package over to the Chicago PD, the FDA, and the IRS right now. They'll be in handcuffs by morning." Julian looked away from the financial data and focused on a different monitor. It showed a live feed of the restaurant during the pre-dinner prep. He saw Sarah carefully polishing a wine glass, holding it up to the light to check for smudges, her face a mask of intense concentration. A quiet professional, doing her job with dignity, while a storm of criminality raged around her. An arrest was clean. It was efficient. It was the logical next step. But it wasn't justice. Not the kind of justice she deserved. A quiet, pre-dawn arrest would mean the story would be controlled by the authorities. It would mean depositions, trials, her name and face possibly dragged through the mud by Wexler's defense attorney. It would make Wexler a problem for the state, not for him. But this was his house. This was his family being terrorized. He would be the one to clean it. "No," Julian said, his voice as final as a judge's gavel. "This doesn't end with a quiet arrest in the middle of the night. This doesn't end with a press release from the DA's office. This ends in the light. I want him to see me. I want him to know that it was his own people, the ones he abused and underestimated, who brought him down." "What's the play, Julian?" Cynthia asked, a hint of a smile touching her lips. She knew this side of him well. "We're going back to the Gilded Steer," Julian said, standing up and walking toward the bedroom to retrieve his suit. "But this time, I'm not coming in through the front door. And I'm not ordering the steak." The next evening, at precisely 8:00 p.m., the height of the chaotic and lucrative dinner rush, Martin Wexler was in his element. He strode through the main dining room like a conquering hero, a pasha surveying his kingdom. Every table was full. The air buzzed with the happy hum of wealthy patrons, and the cash register was singing its sweet, sweet song. He had overseen a particularly profitable inventory swap in the back alley less than an hour ago, and the thick bulge of cash in his jacket pocket felt like a warm, reassuring hand on his back. In this room, under these lights, he was powerful. He was untouchable. He paused to adjust his silk tie in the reflection of a large, gilt-framed mirror. And that's when he saw something that made his blood run cold. A side door, the one leading from the lobby to the private dining rooms, was opening. A group of people were walking in with an air of purpose that did not belong to diners. 4 of them. A severe-looking Asian woman in a razor-sharp, dark gray pantsuit, holding a tablet. 2 broad-shouldered men in plain, dark suits who radiated an aura of calm, intimidating authority that screamed federal law enforcement. And the man leading them. Wexler's heart seized in his chest. His carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. It was the schlub from the other night, the quiet, unassuming man in the worn denim jacket. But the jacket was gone. He was now wearing a dark, custom-tailored Brioni suit that probably cost more than Wexler's car. The deferential slump in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a posture of absolute, unshakable authority. He wasn't looking at the opulent decor with awe. He was surveying it with the cold, calculating, and slightly disappointed gaze of an owner inspecting a flawed asset. He was Julian Blackwood. The name exploded in Wexler's mind like a flashbang grenade. He had seen the pictures, of course, in Fortune and Forbes. But they were curated, professional headshots. Seeing him here, in the flesh, moving through his dining room, was like watching a figure from mythology step out of the clouds, a vengeful god descending from Olympus. Blackwood didn't even glance at him. His eyes, cold and focused, scanned the room until they found their target. Ignoring the gasps and whispers of the patrons who who were beginning to recognize him. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace directly toward Sarah Jenkins. She was in the middle of taking an order from a large family celebrating a birthday at a prime round table. She looked up as the imposing group approached, her face blanching with confusion and a sudden, terrible fear. Had she been found out? Was this her public firing? Julian stopped beside her. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that was meant only for her. It didn't quite reach his eyes. His eyes were for Wexler, who was frozen in place halfway across the room, a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "Ms. Jenkins," Julian said, his voice calm and clear, yet it carried across the suddenly hushed dining room. "My name is Julian Blackwood. I am the owner of this establishment. I believe you have something for me." Sarah stared, speechless, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Her hand, on pure instinct, went to the locket at her throat. I don't understand, sir," she stammered, her notepad trembling in her hand. "The other night, you risked a great deal to provide me with some vital information," Julian continued, his gaze still locked on Wexler, pinning him to the spot. "You were concerned about the health, safety, and integrity of my restaurant. I am here to thank you. You have done this company, its honest employees, and its loyal customers a service of immeasurable value." He then turned his full, undivided attention to Wexler. The entire restaurant was now deathly silent. Forks were suspended mid-air. Conversations had died. The only sound was the faint clatter from the distant kitchen. "Mr. Wexler," Julian's voice dropped, losing all its warmth. It became the sound of a glacier cracking, of immense pressure reaching its breaking point. "You and I need to have a conversation. It's about your unique approach to inventory management and your highly creative accounting practices regarding the nightly cash-outs." Wexler opened his mouth, but only a dry, pathetic croak came out. He looked desperately for an escape route, but his feet felt like they were bolted to the floor. The junior manager, Derek, who had been standing near the bar, trying to look inconspicuous, began to edge slowly toward the kitchen exit. Cynthia Wu took 2 sharp steps to her left, cutting off his path. One of the stony-faced men moved with startling, fluid speed, blocking his path from the other side. He was trapped. "And you must be Derek Malley," Cynthia said, her voice sharp and clinical as she held up her tablet. The screen displayed a color-coded spreadsheet. "I would love to get your professional opinion on this series of transactions. Specifically, every single voided cash transaction from the last 6 months that was authorized with your manager code. For instance, shall we start with check number 8675 from 2 nights ago? A party of 6. Total bill, $872. Paid in cash. A transaction that, according to our central server, simply vanished into thin air." The color drained from Derek's face. It was over. He looked like he was about to be sick. Julian walked slowly, deliberately, toward Wexler, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug. "You built a kingdom of fear in my house, Mr. Wexler. You preyed on your staff. You stole from me. And worst of all, you broke the sacred trust I have with my customers. You put their health at risk by serving them substandard, potentially dangerous product under my family's name." He stopped, standing inches from the sweating, trembling manager. The smell of his fear was palpable. "That is a sin I simply cannot forgive." He gestured to Cynthia and her team. This is Cynthia Wu, my head of corporate intelligence. The two gentlemen with her are not with the police, though I assure you they will be very interested in our findings. They are a private forensic accounting and security team. In a moment, they will be escorting you and Mr. Malley to the back office. There, you will explain, in painstaking detail, every single dollar you have stolen. You will also provide a full confession regarding your conspiracy with your brother-in-law and his fraudulent company, Gourmet Provisions. Julian leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. And if you refuse to cooperate, if you hesitate for even a second, Cynthia will press a single button on her tablet. A button that will instantly forward the mountain of evidence she has collected: video, financial records, sworn affidavits from your suppliers, to the district attorney, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Internal Revenue Service. The choice is yours. But know this with absolute certainty. Your career in this industry and your life as you know it is over. Tonight. Wexler, a broken and defeated man, gave a shuddering sob. The slick, arrogant tyrant had vanished, replaced by the terrified, pathetic debtor underneath. He gave a weak nod and allowed himself to be led away, his shoulders slumped, not even looking back. The dining room erupted in a low, shocked murmur. Julian turned back to the room, his face composed. He addressed the stunned diners. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Julian Blackwood. I sincerely apologize for this interruption to your evening. There has been a serious management issue at this location, and I am here to rectify it personally. In light of this disruption, there will be no checks tonight. Your meals, your drinks, everything is on the house. Please enjoy the rest of your night with our compliments." He then looked at Sarah, who was standing frozen, her eyes wide with shock and dawning comprehension. The family at her table was staring at her, as if she had just been revealed as a secret agent. "Ms. Jenkins," Julian said gently, "when you have a moment, could I have a word with you in private?" Shaking, she nodded numbly and led him to a small, empty alcove near the kitchen entrance, a pocket of relative quiet away from the prying eyes of the dining room. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she began, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," Julian said, his voice soft. "You already said everything that mattered on that napkin. I looked into the system, Sarah. I saw the emails you sent to HR. You tried to do things the right way. You tried to warn us, and we failed you. The system that I built to protect people like you failed you. And for that, I am truly, deeply sorry." Tears, hot and immediate, welled in Sarah's eyes. They were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of a profound, earth-shattering relief. The validation of being heard, the vindication of being seen, finally, after years of being invisible. "That locket you wear," Julian said, his tone softening further. "I noticed you touch it when you're under stress. May I ask what's inside?" Her hand tightened on it protectively. It's a picture of my daughter, Lily," she whispered. "She's 7. She's the reason I put up with him, with all of this. It's for her." Julian nodded slowly, a deep understanding passing between them. He finally grasped the true depth of her courage. She hadn't just been risking her job that night. She had been risking her daughter's stability, her daughter's future, everything she held dear in the world. A person who is willing to risk that much, not for personal gain, but for what is right. is exactly the kind of person I want in a leadership position at this company," he said, his voice filled with a newfound conviction. "This isn't just about getting rid of a bad manager, Sarah. This is about fundamentally changing the culture that allowed a man like him to thrive in the first place." He paused, letting his words sink in, watching the play of emotions on her face. "I'm creating a new position within Blackwood Hospitality, effective immediately. A director of employee advocacy and operational standards for the entire Midwest region. This person will not report to any regional manager. They will report directly to me in New York. They will have the authority to conduct surprise inspections at any of our properties, to speak to any employee confidentially without fear of reprisal, and to override regional management if they see something that compromises our standards or harms our people. They will be the guardian of our staff. They will be their voice." He looked her straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "The job is yours, if you want it. We will provide a full, paid management training program, a salary that reflects the position's immense importance, a full benefits package, and all the support you will ever need. You won't be serving tables anymore, Sarah. You'll be turning them. You'll be changing the entire game." Sarah stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend the seismic, life-altering shift that had just occurred, from waitress to director, from powerless to powerful. The tears finally spilled over, streaming down her cheeks in silent, cleansing rivers. "Why?" she whispered, the single word encompassing a universe of disbelief. "Why me?" "Because you saw the rot, and you weren't afraid to point it out," Julian answered simply, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't do it for a reward. You didn't do it for recognition. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That kind of integrity, Sarah, is a quality that can't be taught on a spreadsheet or in a business school. It's the single most valuable asset in this entire company." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out the small, folded napkin, her shaky, desperate handwriting still visible. He held it out to her in the palm of his hand. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is going to be professionally framed, and it will hang on the wall in my office in New York. It will be a permanent reminder of the day a waitress with a cracked pen and more courage and integrity than my entire executive board saved the soul of my company. Sarah looked from the crumpled napkin, the symbol of her desperate gamble, to the face of the man who had answered her silent prayer. For the first time in 5 long years, she felt the crushing, suffocating weight on her shoulders begin to lift. It wasn't just about the money, or the title, or the new job. It was the restoration of something she thought she had lost forever in the daily grind of survival. The belief that one small person, armed with nothing but the truth, could actually make a difference. That in the cold, transactional world of power and greed, human decency could still, somehow, miraculously, win. As Julian Blackwood left the Gilded Steer later that night, leaving Cynthia and her team to meticulously clean up the mess and begin the process of rebuilding, he felt a profound sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He hadn't just fired a corrupt manager and his crony. He had started a quiet revolution, a revolution sparked by a single, courageous note from an ordinary woman. He had found a new, extraordinary leader. And he had reaffirmed the foundational belief upon which he had built his entire life, that the true strength of any enterprise isn't found on its balance sheets or in its stock price, but in the character and integrity of its people. Faith, he realized as his car sped toward the airfield, wasn't just restored. It was rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than ever before.